letter, they ask the king to check the archives to see if such a decree has really been made. Have they really been given permission, or are they being disobedient? Are they being a rebellious people? So here we see they're not taking that same approach as the governments in the past, but we see Tatnai still, they're still not sure if this thing should be taking place. And so they go right to the king, and they ask if there's anything in the royal records that would allow the people to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Right? And so all of that happens prior to our printed text. The people have been given permission by Cyrus. They go back. They settle into the towns and cities surrounding Jerusalem. They begin to rebuild the temple. They're stopped so many times until finally the king of Persia himself says, stop it. I don't want this to happen any longer. And then they get to the point where I guess that king dies, or that king, his power is usurped. And then King Darius comes into place. And they say, we're going to start rebuilding our effort. We're going to start rebuilding the temple again. And once they get to that point, the local governor, Tatnai, he writes a letter to the king, and he asks them if they really have permission. Is there anything that you can find that really gives them the permission to be able to rebuild the temple? And then that brings us to the beginning of our text today. Sister Brant, is there anything that that you would like to add? Okay. All right. So here we are, the beginning of our text. Ezra chapter 6, verse 1. It reads as follows. Then Darius the king made a decree, and search was made in the house of the rolls where the treasures were laid up in Babylon. Right? So upon receiving this letter, King Darius, he orders for the records to be searched. And then the Bible implies a very detailed record that is kept. And then the archaeological record, it actually bears that out. And our commentary, if you read our commentary, I like that it does go into this. Our commentary, it briefly talks about detailed reports of taxes, expenditures, and local government occurrences being found in the remains of the Persian archives. So the Persian people kept a good record, y'all. And it's important in keeping a good record. Now, you must keep in mind that the Persian Empire was a vast, vast empire, right? And it included areas of Eastern Europe and extended all the way to parts of Asia, right? So it's a pretty big empire for its time. Big empire by any time, really. It's very vast, and it includes a lot of different territories and a lot of countries that we would recognize today. And now this vast empire, they would require local government structures as well, right? So it's not prudent for, I guess, an emperor to think that they can just issue decrees but not have different governors and different figureheads in place to govern the local establishments, right? You as an emperor, even though they're in charge of the whole thing, they're still just one person. Exactly. You got the local governments, exactly. You got the governors that run the states, and then you got mayors that run cities, because for one person to run all of this, it wouldn't be possible. It wouldn't be possible. There's got to be some structure and hierarchy of government. They do. They do. It's a lot to be concerned with. Yeah. And then, we got a whole nother, I don't want to say convoluted, because I don't want to sound like I'm speaking ill of the American governmental system. I'm not really. But it's important to realize that there is local government that needs to be in place. And these local governments would also keep records, right? Just like, here in New York City, we have a mayor, right, that is going to keep records of things. It's not just something that is held in Albany for the governor to do, right? The local government structures are going to keep their own accounts of what is going to happen. And we see that Darius's decree, it didn't just issue to the local place of Babylon, right? He didn't just issue a decree for Babylon to be searched. He issued a decree for the empire to be searched, because we find in verse 2 where it says, and there was found at Acmetha in the palace that is in the province of the Medes a roll, and therein was a record thus written. So we find the record of Cyrus's decree not even in Babylon where the king is, but in this place called Acmetha. And our commentary says that this might have been a summer palace for the Persian royalty, right? So we see that oh, go ahead. Mm-hmm. And the city of Acmetha is actually 285 miles northeast of Babylon. And I'm like, people are like, well, how far is that? And that's what I do. That's what I did. So I was like, well, what is that like what's something I could compare it to? And so it's a little bit more than the distance between here, us in Brooklyn, New York, and my aunt who lives in Manassas, Virginia, right? So so just to give you an idea of just how far that might be, 285 miles from here to Manassas, Virginia, which is that's a good ways, right? That's a good ways. It's a few hours drive now for us with cars. So imagine how long it might have been for people traveling on horseback in the ancient Near East. Right, exactly. So, exactly. So, and exactly. I don't have anything to add. So we see that Cyrus's decree is found. Darius does a thorough search for this, right? He doesn't just limit it to what he has on hand, but he asks for the empire's records to be searched. They find the decree of Cyrus 285 miles northeast of where the central palace of the Persian Empire is located. And then we see that the record is read by Cyrus. And is read by Darius. Cyrus's record, there we go, is read by King Darius. And this is how it starts. In the first year of Cyrus the king, the same Cyrus the king made a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the house be builded, the place where they offered sacrifices, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid, the height thereof 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 80 cubits. So we see the record that has been kept of Cyrus's decree, and then we see Cyrus's decree also includes specifications on how the temple should be constructed. Right? He doesn't just say go back and reconstruct the temple, but he gives them measurements. He tells them how it should be done. Yes, exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up, Sister Brank, because we got to remember that this is all done by God's urging. Right? This isn't just Cyrus coming and saying, I want the people to rebuild this temple. This is done by God's urging. And so if it's done by God's urging, I have to believe that God also gave him instructions to forward to the people of Israel that he was allowing to go back and rebuild the temple. So I have to believe that these, although they're coming through Cyrus, they're coming from God. Right? So Cyrus's decree included specifications on how the temple should be built. It says the foundations must be strongly laid, and I like that because we know that a building without a proper foundation, without a sturdy foundation, is not going to last, right? It's not going to stand for very long. You have to be built on a strong foundation. So then it goes into the measurements, right? It says the height of the temple should be 80 cubits, and it says the breadth thereof should be 80 cubits. And a cubit is about 18 inches, right? A cubit is about 18 inches in length. So a foot and a half, exactly. So if we're going to do 60 cubits, I did the conversions because I just, I wanted to deal with something tangible that I could envision. So 60 cubits high, a height of 60 cubits would be 90 feet high. And a width of 60 cubits would be 90 feet wide. Now, this differs a little bit from the temple that Solomon built, right? The temple that was destroyed. The original temple had these measurements. It was 60 cubits long, meaning it was 90 feet long. It was 20 cubits wide, meaning it was 30 feet wide. And it was 30 cubits high, which means it was 45 feet in height. Now, although Cyrus's decree, it doesn't include the length of the temple, right? We might infer based upon his other measurements, right? He did 60 by 3 score by 3 score, 60 by 60, or 90 by 90, we can infer. I'm not saying that it was, so don't quote me here. But we might be able to infer that it was also 60 cubits long or 90 feet long. And if we go with this assumption, then this new temple that Cyrus is asking to be constructed, or is decreeing, because he's not asking, right? A decree is not a request. A decree is a demand. A decree is something that is written into law. A decree is something that is going to happen. So if we go with the fact that, the assumption that this thing might be 60 cubits long as well, or 90 feet long, then it would be a perfect cube. It would be 60 by 60 by 60, or if we're talking in cubits, or if you want to talk in feet, then it'd be 90 by 90 by 90. And so the measurements of this temple being a perfect cube, it would parallel the dimensions of the Holy of Holies in Solomon's original temple. So in Solomon's original temple, we all know the place, the Holies of Holies, the place where only the high priest could go, right? Nobody else could go into this Holies of Holies. And even then, the high priest, when he went to the Holies of Holies, had to have a rope tied around him. He had bells on his ephod. This way, if the Holies of Holies and his heart wasn't right, he dropped dead. The people couldn't go in there and get him, right? They got him like, no, we go in there and get him. We might die too. So they had to pull him out. So if they heard those bells clinging and jingling, they're like, oh man, we done lost the high priest. And they got to pull him out of there. So, but this Holy of Holies, like this inner sanctuary, this most sacred place in the original temple, it also was a perfect cube, right? And if you look at, I think it's 1 Kings 6 and 20, I think, am I right? Yes, I am. All right. Hallelujah. We see, if you read it, it gives a 30 by 30 by 30, right? That's also a perfect cube. So the overall temple is going to take on it's going to parallel, I should say, the dimensions of the most holy place in Solomon's original temple. So there's some things happening, there's some things moving. I think that's a very apt parallel. I think it's very important to note that now the whole temple is a perfect cube. So in Solomon's original design, just the holiest place was a perfect cube. But now God is allowing them to go in, and they're building it bigger than it was, right? They're building it bigger than it was. So, it was 60 by 20 by 30, and now it's going to be 90 by 90 by 90. It's not going to be as beautiful, right? Because there was so much gold. There was so much things that were inlaid into the temple, into the walls of the temple. So it won't be as beautiful, but it will be able to house more people. Exactly.
I'm trying to think, since there was a decree that everybody should give no matter what, the king across the river and everybody else had to give no matter what the priest need, I kind of feel it was more than sufficient.
Oh, it was sufficient. It was sufficient, absolutely. But it's the beauty of it is lost, and the biblical record bears that out. The Bible says it. It's not as ornate as Solomon's temple was, but as you said, it's sufficient. And then, as we'll see in later verses in our printed text today, that there are elements from Solomon's original temple that are going to find their way back to this new temple. So there's going to be some of that original detail, original worship vessels, the original worship vessels, I'll just say what they are, that will find their way back to the newly constructed temple of God.
Well, that's what Darius, under the decree of Cyrus made a decree that his son Darius would do all these things for him. Much like David couldn't build the temple, but Solomon did.
Solomon built it, exactly.
Okay, since that decree was made, he had to follow the decree of his father, that all the golden vessels, the silver, and the ornaments of the temple should be returned to the Israelite priests.
So let's go to verse 4 and 5, right? Well, I'll read verse 4. Of great stones. So this is I'm gonna read from the end of verse 3, and I'm gonna go into verse 4. We already talked about this, but I'm gonna read it again. Let the house be builded, the place where they offered sacrifices, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid. The height thereof 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 60 cubits, with 3 rows of great stones and a row of new timber. Right, and so I'll stop there for a second before I read the rest of verse 4. We see that the archaeological record bears out that if you lay multiple layers of stone and then a layer of timber on top of it, that this can protect against earthquakes. This can protect the building against earthquakes. So when Cyrus gives this decree, he gives it with the mind toward protecting this temple from at least the natural catastrophes, natural disasters. Right, so he's making sure that it's not going to fall down if the ground rocks. Right, the only way that this is going to fall down, and we see this way later. Only way that this place would possibly be destroyed is by human intervention, by human hands, and we do see that later on that this temple is destroyed. But that's another topic for another day. We're talking about it being reconstructed right now. He then goes on to say in the rest of verse 4, and let the expenses be given out of the king's house. Right, so he further instructs that the expenses for the construction, they have to be subsidized by the funds from the royal treasury. Right, this reconstructed temple, right, so there's supply coming in, all the expenses that they're going to incur, right, they're going to be paid for by the royal treasury, by the king's house, as it says in our word. So this is some good things, right? So not only do the Jewish people have permission to go out and permission to rebuild the temple, but now they have permission. They have greater permission. They have permission to take from the royal funds to do this, right? They don't have to come completely out of pocket, but they're going to give something, but the royal treasury is going to come and it's going to say, oh, what, you need some more. You need some more wood? Okay, go get them some more wood. It's on us. Oh, you need some more stones? Go get them some more stones. It's on us. Oh, you need some more of this? Go get some more of this. You need some more of that? Go get some more of that. It's on us. They're not going broke trying to rebuild this temple.
No, they're not.
So that's a good thing. That's a great thing. They can support themselves.
The gold is not used to build the door anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and the walls and things like that.
Right.
For the implements of the building.
And I'm going to go to verse 5. And also, this is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. And also let the golden and silver vessels of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took forth out of the temple, which is at Jerusalem, let them be brought back unto Babylon. Be restored and brought again unto the temple, which is at Jerusalem, everyone to his place, and place them in the house of God. So we see that this reconstructed temple would have some elements of Solomon's original temple, right? Cyrus ordered for the gold and the silver vessels to be restored. And these vessels were made by Solomon, and they were used for worship practices in the temple. And it says it a little bit in our text, but just to go a little bit deeper, when Nebuchadnezzar, he came and he conquered Judah, right? Our text is very nice in the way it puts it. It says he confiscated them, right? He confiscated them. He didn't confiscate them. He stole them. He pillaged them. And let's just call it what it is. So he takes these vessels, he steals them, he pillages them. I'm going to use stronger language than the Bible. Lord, forgive me. But he takes these vessels, right, and now they are going to be restored to their rightful place, to be used in the rightful way. We see in the book of Daniel, and our text mentions this, King Belshazzar, he uses these vessels as drinking cups, right, at a feast. He takes them and he's like, he has a feast and he's got his wives, his concubines, his family, right, and he's like, go get the vessels from the temple that my father, right, go get them so that we might drink from them. And then they get them, they drink wine and stuff from them, and then as they're drinking wine and stuff from them, they start to worship, I want to get this right, they start to worship the gods of silver, gold, bronze, wood, iron, and stone, right? So they take them. Now these vessels were supposed to be used in a proper worship to the one true and living God. And they take them, right? And first they disrespect them just by drinking out of them. But then they go a step further, and while they're drinking out of them, they're saying, well, we're going to worship the gods we want to worship. So even though they're supposed to be used for the worship of the one true and living God, they're using them, and then they're going on and worshiping other gods. So it's like a further disrespect of the sacred vessels. And so what we see is and what the commentary tells us, these vessels will probably have to be reconsecrated before being designated for use in the temple. Right, so they've got to be, gone back, and they've got to be prayed over. There's different steps, and it's listed in the book of Exodus exactly what must be done. I think they have to be anointed with oil, some other things like that. The things that must be done before these vessels can come back and be used in the temple, right? And it's very important at this time that we remember just how big it is for things to be considered unclean, right? Things can very easily be considered unclean. A person very easily could be considered unclean at this time. Right. So they're going to take. Right. You touch a woman that's having, on the time of her month, that time of the month, you touch her. Unclean. You're considered unclean. She's unclean. You touch her, now you're by extension unclean. You touch a dead body, you are unclean. There's things like that that are in place where you can so easily be considered unclean. So we have to remember that they would take this very seriously. They would not take these vessels before they were able to consecrate them, before they were able to now make them suitable for use in the temple. That's right. That's right. That's right. So, I mean, God is only going to take for so much disrespect. And he allowed, what I like about the Bible, I'm going to go off topic for like a second, and I promise I'll come back. But what I do like about the word is that it's very clear that God is sovereign, and that God will use whom he deems fit to use to have his purpose carried out. And so we see that when King Nebuchadnezzar comes and he captures the people of Judah to exile them away, it says in the word that God is using Nebuchadnezzar as his agent. That's right. God is using Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is not somebody that worships the Lord, right? He worships his own gods. He worships the people that he wants to. But he's saying, you know what? You people have been so disobedient. You know better. Nebuchadnezzar, I'm not sure exactly what Nebuchadnezzar has heard or what he hasn't heard, but the people of Israel know better. They are the ones that God has carried up out of Egypt. They are the ones that God kept in the wilderness. They are the ones that God allowed them to make a nation amongst themselves, right? So they should know better. But because they've been so disobedient, God says, I'm going to use this person that you would deem to be a heathen to come in and get you right. He's going to be my agent. And just because you pray to me, it's not going to help you in this time. You've done enough that I've got to exile you now. I've got to exile you now. But then it doesn't, even though it talks about Nebuchadnezzar being used as an agent of God, it doesn't absolve him from the things that he does that's wrong. Right? That's what I like about our word. Our word tells the truth, y'all. Our word tells the truth. It doesn't paint this glorified picture of God's people, but it shows them in their humanness. Right? It shows them in their humanness. So when I hear people talk about, the Bible is this propaganda, well, every bit of propaganda that I've read always paints one side in a really good light and one side in a really bad light. But our Bible doesn't do that, right? It could paint King David. It says that he's a man after God's own heart, and it could leave it there. But it talks about his indiscretions as well. Every person except for one, every person, it talks about their sins as well as the things that they've done for God. The one person that it doesn't do that with is Jesus Christ. And that's because Jesus Christ is sinless. He is without sin. So there's nothing to talk about with that. Go ahead.
That's why they don't like that Bible, because it's telling them about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who takes correction and judgment on those who still love their sin.
Amen. He did. He did. No, God is harsh on his, not harsh on his people. I won't say that, because God is fair. God is fair to his people, and he gives them, when we talk about, I'm not saying that this is untrue or anything like that, but when we talk about certain things, You know, sometimes people, when they talk about the Old Testament, they try to paint God as though he's just a God of judgment, as though he doesn't exhibit grace, as though he doesn't exhibit mercy, as though he doesn't exhibit love. And I'm like, no, the God in the Old Testament and the God in the New Testament are one and the same. He exhibits grace and mercy throughout his whole biblical record, right? He could have killed, he did judge the people with the flood, but after that, he said that he would never judge them again. He put the rainbow in the sky as a sign that he would never destroy the earth like that again. Then he goes on, and the people that he brings out of Egypt, Moses goes up to the mountain. Moses goes up to the mountain. He's up there for 40 days and 40 nights. And these people who not too long ago were carried out of Egypt, they walked through the Red Sea. They saw the Red Sea part, and they walked on dry land across to the other side. These same people are like, oh my God, Moses is gone. What should we do? They go to Aaron. Aaron, we need something to worship. We need something to follow. We don't know if Moses is ever going to come back, Aaron. And Aaron, who has been closer than anybody to these miracles except for Moses, right? It's been God talking to Moses, and then Moses will relay it to Aaron, right? So Aaron just has the 1 degree of separation. He's seen these things. He's seen his staff bud. He's seen that when he put his staff into the river, it turned to blood. He's seen all these things. But when these people come to him, he says, okay, give me your gold. Give me all your gold. Give me all your gold. I'm going to put it in the fire. And then whatever comes out, that's what we're going to worship. So they put it in the fire, and then a calf comes out. And they start to worship the calf. And even just reading it, I don't get so mad at I get mad at them, but I don't get so mad at the Israelites. But Aaron, I'm like, Aaron, you were there. You were right there. You saw all the things. Your brother is Moses. What are you doing, Aaron? What are you doing? And Aaron, he gives into the people because they pressure him. Instead of just saying, you know what, let's just give Moses some time to come back. We know the God that's brought us down. Instead of him standing up there and taking his place as Moses' second, he's like, y'all right, let's do this. And so I get mad at Aaron, but then we see that God wants to smite them, right? He wants to smite them right then and there, but Moses prays for them. God can smite the Israelites multiple times throughout their time in the wilderness. He does allow them to wander there for 40 years so that the old generation can die out and the new generation can take over. But still, he has mercy on them because he could have wiped them out as a people. God.
3,000 people went into the pit that day.
Mm-hmm.
When Moses cast down
That's right.
the tablets. He said, those on the Lord's side draw to me.
Right.
Those on Baal's side. And then he said, he threw down the tablets.
He broke the tablets, right? Because he had to get a new set of tablets. But what we see is that there are so many instances where God can exercise his wrath upon a people, and he doesn't. He relents. He holds back. He says, you know what? I'm going to give you another chance. The people repent. We even see it in the book of Jonah, where he's going to, it says, overturn the city of Nineveh. And they stop what they're doing, and they pray, and they repent. And he says, okay, I'll relent. I will relent. I will not do what I had intended to do. And so we see multiple instances throughout the Old Testament record of God having mercy on his people. And even when he exiles the people, that's mercy because he could have killed them.
That's right.
That's mercy because he could have killed them. Right? He could have had the Babylonians come in and not just sack the place, but leave no survivors. Not just sack the place, but take all the women, right, and make them their own wives. Not just sack the place, but just utterly destroy it. And what we see is that God is still merciful. He's still loving. He's still gracious.
He wanted them to feel every bit of it.
But he wanted them to come out of it.
Yes, sir.
And so that's the thing about God. God has that retributive justice, right? Where it's not just about, oh, you have to pay for what you've done. It's about you learning something from it. You have to learn from it so that God can ultimately restore you. And that's what we see here. They're at the end of that lesson phase, and God is going to restore them now. And then we go to verse 6. I'm going to go back to this. I'm sorry for that small divergence, but we're going to jump back in. Verse 6, we're in Ezra chapter 6, and now we're looking at verse 6. Now therefore Tatnai, governor beyond the river, Shethar-Boznai, and your companions, the Aphrasackites, which are beyond the river, be ye far from thence. Right? Let the work of this house of God alone, let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews build this house of God in his place. So after fully relaying what Cyrus decreed, now this is King Darius speaking. And he issues his own instructions now. So we've heard Cyrus's instructions up to this point. Now we're hearing Darius's instructions. Now the first thing he does is he instructs Tatnai and his whole cohort, there we go, all his colleagues to stay away from the Jews. Do not bother them in their rebuilding efforts. Leave them alone and do what they got to do. They've got their instructions. They know whose instructions they're following. Leave them alone. They're doing the right thing. Right. They're doing the right thing. Leave them. Right. You're going to allow them to build this house of God in its place. And then he goes a step further in verse 8. Moreover, right, even further, he's saying, furthermore, whatever word you want to substitute in there, I make a decree what ye shall do to the elders of these Jews for the building of this house of God. That of the king's goods, even of the tribute beyond the river, right, of the king's goods, of the things that are supposed to be for the kingdom, of the things that are supposed to be for the royal treasury, of the things that are supposed to be, if you want to really get technical, for the king's pleasure, right? These things they're going to take from these goods, even the tribute, right, or the tax, the things that the tax that is being collected from beyond the river, you're going to give it to them for their expenses. You're going to give it to the Jews for the expenses. So those things that are supposed to be for my pleasure, those taxes that you're collecting, that you might take a little bit of that tax for yourself, you know, you're going to give the rest to me. You're going to give that tax to them so that they can pay for what they need to do. Then do not hinder them. That's right. Stay out of their way. Stay out of their way. Do not bother them. Do not bother them. Leave them alone. I can't think of any other ways to say it. Don't touch them. Don't touch them. And then he goes even further than that. And he says, and that which they have need of. And that which they have need of, in verse 9, both young bullocks and rams and lambs for the burnt offerings of the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, and oil, according to the appointment of the priests which are at Jerusalem, let it be given them day by day. This is this last part right here. Without fail. Day by day, without fail. So that means every day, without fail, no matter what, you make sure that they have all that they need to sacrifice, to make the necessary sacrifices to their God. Without fail. And that's an important thing to think about. And so when I think about without fail, that means to me, even if you're running a little low, I don't care. You make sure they get what they need. If we're running low, or if you're running low, figure it out. But you have to make sure that they get what they need every day without fail. So he issues a very stern decree, and it's clear. There's no sense of ambiguity in it, right? He's very clear on what he wants done. I want these things done, and you have to make sure that every day you are doing it without fail. There better not come a day. There better not come a day where this thing does not happen, right? And then verse 10, it really just elaborates on what we're talking about now, that they may offer sacrifices of sweet savors unto the God of heaven. And then we see Darius. He has to throw his little thing in there for himself, right? He's like, let them sacrifice to their God, give them everything that they need to rebuild their temple so that they might sacrifice unto the God of heaven, and then, pray for the life of their king. Pray for the life of the king. You got to make sure that the king and his family are covered. Right, the king and his family. The king and his family, you got to make sure that they're covered. Right, so let them do everything that they got to do so that they can go, and pray for the king and everybody. They got to keep me covered and everything. That's so. I just found out a little funny. When he taxed that thing on the end of verse 10, and this is not an uncommon practice, right? because the people of the ancient Near East, a lot of the non-Jewish cultures that you find out there, they are not above having you worship your God, right? They're like, well, if you worship your God and I worship my God and they worship their God, somebody's God's got to do it, right? Somebody's God's going to work it out. And we see that, I'm going to go back to the book of Jonah, but we see that in the book of Jonah when in the first chapter where the boat is rocking and it's looking like it's going to sink. Jonah, is asleep. Jonah don't even know what's going on, but all the men on board, they're like, oh my God, we got to do this. You pray to your God. You pray to your God. You pray to your God. And that's why they wake up Jonah. They're like, Jonah, you pray to your God. We need somebody's God to come in and do something. We need somebody's God to do something. So it's kind of the same thing here with the king. The king is like, you know what? All of you, I might not worship the gods you worship, right? I got my own set of gods, but if you pray to your God and you pray to your God and you Jews, you pray to your God and you ask them to bless me, somebody's God is going to bless me. Somebody's God is going to come through and he's going to do what I'm asking him to do. So, we just see a little bit more of that. And so it's not uncommon for the people of that time. And while it's gracious, right? And it shows that God's favor is truly with the Jews at this time. It's not necessarily out of the ordinary. But what it does show, and I think what the decree as a whole shows is that God is with his people, right? Because God not only gives them permission to go back, but God gives them permission to go back. It's paid for. All the sacrifices that they need to sacrifice, those are supplied. Every need that they have in rebuilding this temple, God supplies that need. So in Ezra